Over time, the focus of women's rights activists changed, but the ultimate goal of gaining increasing rights remained, as many influential women fought for more gender equality in all decades of American history. In the 1600s and 1700s, women's rights advocates primarily fought for gaining an increased role in the church, with people like Anne Hutchinson. She was met with repression after holding meetings in her home and challenging the authority of the church, and was eventually kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for her activism for pursuing an equal role in religion. Once the U.S. began developing as an independent nation, people like Abigail Adams hoped to increase their voice in the government and participate in the revolution by asking the Founding Fathers to remember the ladies in their legislation. After gaining more religious freedoms, women were able to expand their efforts into more areas of society. Women got more involved in charities and women's refuges, and many women's rights advocates were also abolitionists, like Lucretia Mott. She was a very prominent abolitionist, social reformer, and women's rights advocate. She also became a Quaker minister and co-founded the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, and also took part in the Seneca Falls Convention. Additionally, the Civil War also allowed for women to step up and take roles as nurses, tending to wounded soldiers. Following this time period, many women's rights advocates intensified and focused their efforts and created more long-term solutions to their issues. They strongly advocated for the temperance movement, which they hoped would increase the morality of society in general and improve the safety of women's lives by decreasing the amount of abuse that they were subject to. Women's rights advocates also fought for the right to vote. Although the 15th Amendment didn't give women the right to vote, like they were hoping it would, the women's rights groups split into two organizations. The National Women's Suffrage Association, created by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and the American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Lucy Stone. In 1890, these two groups joined to create the National American Women's Suffrage Association, and many peaceful protests erupted across the country. In 1920, all this work paid off as the 19th Amendment secured women's power to vote. Thanks to the 19th Amendment, more than 8 million women exercised their right to vote in the 1920 election, and women were beginning to gain a bigger role in political life. The sexual revolution also began in the 1920s, and women started getting rid of restrictive corsets in favor of lighter clothing that revealed their arms and legs. They also engaged in smoking and drinking, behavior that was previously deemed to be inappropriate for women. Although this was met with criticism, it signaled a shift in women's behavior and the rejection of gender norms that would intensify in later periods. It inspired more freedom and redefined women's cultural identities. As world wars began to reshape the world, many men went off to war, and many women were able to take advantage of the job vacancies and become more involved in the workplace, which supported the army overseas. Women of war and Rosie the Riveter became symbols of an evolving society, in which women were given a bigger role in the economic and political prosperity of America during wartime. In addition, in 1933, Frances Perkins became the first female cabinet member, and the Fair Labor Standards Act established minimum wage regardless of sex. After Pearl Harbor, women were allowed to serve in gender-segregated units in the military, and more than 350,000 women served. After gaining more workplace rights, one of the main goals of feminism in the 1960s and 70s was to overturn the belief that women were intellectually inferior, more emotional, and better suited to domestic lifestyle than politics or careers. As more women entered the workforce, they fought against the huge wage gap and sexual harassment that they were often met with. In 1960, the federal government approved a birth control pill, and by the end of the 60s, more than 80% of wives of childbearing age were using contraception, freeing them from unwanted pregnancies and giving them more options in life. In 1966, Betty Friedan, the writer of The Feminine Mystique, joined other feminist leaders from the National Organization for Women, challenging regressive laws, discrimination, and encouraging gender equality. One of the primary goals of the feminist movement during the modern day is to make the fight for gender equality more inclusive and to fight for equality for women of all colors, ethnicities, nationalities, social classes, and religions. Feminists have also continued to fight for more reproductive rights for women, ending the wage gap and challenging gender norms.
Go.
Throughout history, the roles and rights of women have changed, but their willingness to fight for what they believed in and what they deserved never wavered. The resilience and power of women have been an inspirational factor in shaping the identities of the modern woman. Without the work of these influential women, the fight for gender equality would have been a much more difficult battle, and today's society would not have progressed as much as it has so far. Thank you! Wait.